So we're going to talk about tonight, with God's help, one of the most fundamental concepts in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. And that is the concept of the Sefiros. How do you translate Sefiros? It's a little bit difficult to translate it, but you might call the Eser Sefiros the 10 emanations. These are 10 godly qualities or godly attributes. Obviously, God is infinite and cannot be described because that itself would be a limitation. But from our finite perspective, these are 10 contexts within which creation experiences Hashem. So we're going to talk about these Sefiros, these divine attributes, not only as they are divine, but also as they are human. Because we learn that there's a structure, a repeating pattern, whereby the 10 Sefiros within Hashem are repeated in the Eser Koiches HaNefesh, the 10 soul powers of the person. And it's the same exact structure. It's the same qualities, same names, same functions, same relationships between these different functions. It's just one is the source and the other is the copy. And as such, this lends itself to learning in two directions. There's the direction of below to above, and there's the direction of above to below. So below to above, what we call hafshata, means to take the human experience of this concept and to strip it away from its human limited context and use it as a metaphor to understand, to lift it up and to understand how that same structure exists within the Creator. So in other words, to put it in very simple terms, by understanding a little bit about human psychology, we have wonderful metaphors to understand the way God relates to us. So that's that direction, below to above. But then there's above to below. That's what we call halbasha. Halbasha is when we invest, we take the idea and we clothe it within some type of relatable context. And that's the exact opposite, where you take the abstraction or the archetype, the description of the divine attribute, and when you have an insight about how that functions, you can actually then bring it down and apply it to the human experience. So you can go both directions, and we do go both directions. And what that means is that once you realize that these are like fractals in mathematics, repeating themselves, patterns, then you realize that a metaphysical insight is a psychological insight, and a psychological insight is a metaphysical insight, because it's the same pattern, and it's just the question of where are you starting and where are you finishing. Okay. So I want to start with a text which many people know, especially if you daven Nusach Ari. You know it as part of the prayers on Friday afternoon for the preparation for Shabbos. But it's not a prayer. It's actually it's study. We study a text, a Kabbalistic text before Shabbos. It's from the Tikunei Zohar, which is a portion of the Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, and it's called Posech Eliyahu. Posech Eliyahu means Eliyahu or Elijah opened, which means he opened his discourse. Who's the Elijah? Elijah the prophet. So Elijah the prophet gave a discourse. And we're not going to read the entire text, but I'll just read you parts of it. He explains, Elijah, that, this is in Aramaic, by the way, because Zohar is in Aramaic. Riboin Olmin, master of the worlds. Da'antu chod v'la v'chushbon. You are one, but not in the numerical sense. Meaning to say, if it's one in the numerical sense, so that might mean that God is the first, he's one, but then there's a 2, a 3, a 4, God forbid. But God is absolute oneness. Antu Ilo, I'll call Elohim. You are elevated beyond all of the elevated. Stima, I'll call Stemen. You are more hidden than all the hidden. Les machshava tfisa bach klal, and no thought can grasp you whatsoever. Now, having said that Hashem is absolute oneness, elevated and hidden, unrelatable, then we're told, however, and this is a paradox, Antu da pikas asar tikunin, you are the one who you bring forth or brought forth 10 garments. V'karinin lahain asar sfiron, and we call them the 10 Sefiros, lanhoga bahain alman, which you use to conduct worlds. And then it goes on, you understand what we're saying, that Hashem is oneness. Do not think that he is, God forbid, a composite of these traits. But this oneness is expressed in these different ways. Think of like light through a prism. It's really one light. And it goes on and explains these different spheroids or emanations. Skip ahead just a little bit. The description here uses anthropomorphism. And as I mentioned before, the pattern is a repeating pattern, as above, so below. When we describe these qualities in the context of an anatomical configuration, do not, God forbid, think that this means that we're describing God as having a body, but rather understand that it's probably more helpful to understand like this, that we're speaking metaphorically and we are the metaphor. So when we say, for instance, that God's right arm is kindness, that's actually not a metaphor. That's whatever God's right arm, so to speak, is. That is the archetypical true sense of kindness. This thing that I'm waving at you over here, that's the metaphor. That's the approximation. That's the simulation that gives us a glimmer of what the actual thing is. So when we use the anatomical imagery, don't get confused. And this is, by the way, why traditionally, historically, Kabbalah was not always studied by all people at all times, because you do have to be careful. It takes a certain amount of maturity. But in this generation, all of those restrictions have been removed, and everybody does study Kabbalah. And this is real Kabbalah, by the way. This is Tikunei. This is actual Kabbalah. It's not like sometimes people learn other things and it has a little Kabbalistic jargon in it, so they tell you you're learning Kabbalah. This is actual Kabbalah. So he goes on and he explains with a anthropomorphic, anatomical model. Chesed dreya yamina, like we said earlier, kindness is the right arm. Gvura dreya smala, severity is the left arm. Tiferes gufa, compassion, well, literally it means beauty, but we'll explain later why that's compassion, is the torso. Netzach v'hoid trein shoikin, call it perseverance and poise, are the two thighs. Yesoid, siyuma de gufa oispris kodesh, and the sphera of foundation is the reproductive organ, the place of the circumcision. Malchus peh tereshabal peh, Karinin law. Malchus, kingship, sovereignty, is the mouth of the oral Torah. And then he goes on and explains the intellectual spheres, Chochma and Bina, as well. Okay, so let's unpack this. What are we talking about here? There's a section in Tanya, the section of Tanya called Igeres HaKodesh, which are letters that the Baal Tanya wrote on different occasions. And they were compiled as a volume of Tanya. In Simin Tes Vav, that's Igeres HaKodesh, letter number 15. The Baal Tanya breaks it down and explains these spheros very, very clearly. And he explains it like this. He says, we're going to look at it as it exists within the human experience, with the understanding that this is how we glimpse the model for it. Imagine if someone showed you, for instance, a scale model of an architectural project. So you would understand that that's to scale, that that's not an actual, you're not going to go live in that house. You're not going to open the door and see, can I turn on the lights? Is there running water? You understand it's a representation, but it's a useful representation. So the Baal Tanya says, let's look at the spheros as they exist within the human experience and understand them as divine energies as well. Okay, so I'm going to read to you the text. This is not from the beginning. I'm skipping to the middle of the letter. Like I said, it's Simin Tes Vav, letter 15. V'hine klolus hayud sfiros shebenishmas ha'adam. The generality, the totality of these 10 spheros as they appear within the soul of man, noida lakoil b'derech klal, shamidis nechalokis b'derech klal azayin midos. That these attributes break down into 7. The kol prate hamidis sheba'adam boyes ma'achas mezayin midas elu, and all of the various different emotional attributes of a person can be traced back to one of these 7. In other words, you may have more hues and shades of emotions, but they all fit into one of these 7 categories. Shehein sheidish kol hamidis suklolusan, which these 7 are the categories. Shehein. And then they are, namely, midas hachesed lashpia bli gvul. So the first one, he says, midas hachesed, the attribute of kindness, lashpia bli gvul, to give endless influence. Now, if you remember from the Pasuk Eliyahu, he called that draya yamina, the right arm. Over here, he describes it not with an anatomical symbol, but rather he describes the functionality of it. Lashpia bli gvul, to give endless influence. What is this energy? What is this energy called chesed? It is the drive to give. To give until whenever. Just to give. There are no limits. There's another sphera for that. Pure, unadulterated chesed is just giving. That's what it does. It gives. Sometimes, by the way, we use a different word for this sphera. There's a verse, actually you may be familiar with, that we say in davening, in the prayer services, specifically during the Torah service, when we take the Torah out of the ark, we say, L'cho Hashem hagdula v'hagvura v'hatiferes v'hanetzach v'hahoid. So you'll recognize the string of those words, gvura and tiferes and netzach and hoid. You recognize, I read that from the Pasuk Eliyahu a minute ago. So, but the first word wasn't chesed, was it? What did he say? L'cho Hashem hagdula v'hagvura v'hatiferes v'hanetzach v'hahoid. He calls it gdula. Gdula is like the word gadol. It means big, bigness. Gdula is bigness. Why is that sphera called bigness? Chesed means kindness. Gdula means bigness. Because it is the drive for expansion. Now, I mentioned how these these models repeat themselves on different planes. The truth is, when I say it exists within the human psyche, that's an oversimplification, because it reproduces itself multiple times within the human psyche on different tiers. In other words, there's the way that it's present within the godly soul, which is a soul which is totally God conscious and surrendered to God. But those same patterns reproduce themselves also within what we call the nefesh hasichlis, which is more of what you might call a philosophical soul. And then there's the nefesh habahamis, the animalistic soul, which is self-serving and survival-driven, and it is also composed of that same configuration. In the animalistic soul is where you see this very poignantly. That chesed of the nefesh habahamis, don't get nervous from all those Chassidic or Kabbalistic terms. I'll say it in plain English. That this faculty, which sometimes we call chesed, sometimes we call gedula, in the animal soul, which is bent on survival, it's not too interested in spirituality, it's interested in looking out for itself. So when it expresses chesed, it can express it in a way that is domineering, expansive, conquering, because the function of chesed is to go big. And if there's not that sensitivity of holiness to give for the right reasons in the right appropriate context, if it's just driven by ego, then it can be invasive, encroaching. But it's the same concept. It's just that's the way it reiterates itself on that lower plane. Now, if you trace it back to like the highest archetype, which is Hashem's chesed, Hashem's energy of giving, then that would be the source of Hashem's creativity, the fact that Hashem decided to make a world, and that he decided to sustain that world, and he continues to sustain that world. That's an expression of Hashem's chesed. But chesed is always expansiveness. It's always going out of yourself. Umidas hagvura, he continues. The attribute of gvura, gvura literally means strength, but we might translate it as self-containment. Litzamtzim milahashpia kol kach, to compress or withhold or to put a filter or a damper on the level of influence. So you see how it counterbalances chesed. Chesed is lashpia bli gvul, to give limitless influence. And that's what it is. There are no limits inherent in chesed. But it is offset and complemented by its opposite, which is gvura, which puts the brakes on the chesed. Sometimes when I talk to people about relationships, I'll tell them chesed and gvura is like love and respect. That in a healthy relationship, love is what you do for the person, how you approach them, how you give to them. Respect, though, is what you don't do because of them, the space that you give them, the fact that you back off and certain things, you don't go there. They don't want it. You back off, right? So there's the gas and there's the brakes. There's getting close and there's backing off. Okay. So that's chesed and gvura. And he continues, umidas harachamim. Now, he calls it midas harachamim here, which means compassion. In the Pasach Eliyahu, originally he called it tiferes. Why? Tiferes literally means beauty or harmonic beauty. Rachamim means compassion. What's the relationship there? So I'll explain, well, I'll read to you. L'rachem al mi sheshayach lashon rachmanas alav. To bestow compassion upon one who is befitting to receive compassion. To pity the pitiable. V'himida mumutzas ben gvura lechesed, and that is an intermediary attribute that falls between the extremes of chesed and gvura. Shehi lashpia lakoil, because chesed is to give to everyone, gam lemi shaloi shayach loshen rachmanas olav klal, even to one who is not pitiful. Because he's not lacking anything and he's not in pain. And because it's an intermediary trait, nikras tiferes, it's called beauty. Like a beautiful garment, which is made from many different colors, which complement each other, in a way that is beautiful. So follow what he just explained there. What's the difference between chesed and rachmanas? Kindness and mercy. Kindness gives because that's what kindness does. It has nothing to do with the recipient. It gives because that's what it does. It gives. So you're walking down the street handing out $100 bills. You're giving a $100 bill to the rich guy. You give a $100 bill to the homeless guy. It doesn't matter. You're not asking who needs $100. You're just walking down the street giving out $100. That's chesed. It's not looking at the recipient. It's just giving. Rachmanas, he says, or rachamim, is only giving on a need, on a basis of need. That the person who needs it, you look and say, oh, look at this person. They could use $100. I'm not going to give to that guy. He doesn't need it. That guy needs it. Why is that considered the intermediary between chesed and gvura? Well, remember, we said that gvura is the brakes. It throttles the giving. Says, let's not give so much. There's another name for gvura, by the way. Just like we said, chesed is sometimes called gedula. And all these spheres have various different names. Gvura is sometimes called din. Din means judgment. Why is gvura judgment? Because it makes a judgment. It says, maybe not. Let's not give. Maybe the recipient's not worthy. Maybe the recipient can't handle it. So gvura says, no, let's not give. Chesed says, let's give. Gvura says, let's not. Rachamim is the mixture of both that says, let's make a judgment. Yeah, true. Let's not give to everybody. True. Let's give when we judge somebody's situation worthy of giving. Oh, look at this guy. He's so pitiful. Got to give to him. That's rachamim. So you might even say like chesed is indiscriminate kindness because it's not really taking the recipient into account. Rachamim is judicious kindness. It has the judiciousness of din and gvura, but what's it doing? It's giving. It's just doing it strategically. And it's called tiferes because it has properties of chesed and gvura, just like something that's monochromatic generally is not so beautiful. Beauty, aesthetically speaking, is where you have opposites that are harmonized. So he said, if you have a garment with many colors, so that's beautiful. A garment of one color is, kind of boring, black and white, But you have a nice, like Yosef Atzadik, like Joseph's multicolored garment, beautiful. So that's why it's called tiferes. It's called beauty. And if you remember from the Pasuk Eliyahu, anatomically, how was it described? Do you remember? We said chesed dreya yamina, the right arm. Gvura dreya smola. Gvura is the left arm. Tiferes, gufa, the body, the torso. Yeah. So, again, God doesn't have arms and torsos, but the point is, just like a torso is the bridge between the arms, actually, I should reverse it. It's making it sound, again, I told you which one is the metaphor. We're the metaphor. So it's the fact that there's a torso connecting your arms is a lower level manifestation and derivation of the fact that there's a midah called tiferes which connects chesed and gvura on the godly plane. Okay. V'achar and then afterwards. What does it mean afterwards? Before and after are chronological terms. Like, what's the time frame here? What are we describing here? Well, let me ask you a question. That whole anatomical configuration, arm and body, and then you have the legs and all that stuff. Aside from the fact that you can't describe God anatomically, can you even describe God spatially? No. So we don't obviously mean something that we're plotting on like a Cartesian grid, like, oh, here, like you sink my battleship. We're not trying to figure out where something is. We're describing a process. And the process, we talk about earlier phases and later phases. We're not speaking chronologically. Now, perhaps on the human level, you can say that we experience these things broken up as under the dominion of time-space. So it happens in a lightning flash, but these things are happening on the human level in a time sequence. When we're talking about the divine paradigm, we're talking about a process, but it's not a process in the temporal sense. It's a process in the sense that we said the Sefiros are for the infinite to relate to the finite. They are interfaces for the finite to experience the infinite. So as such, you can think of it like this. This process is the process of how infinity creates a relationship with the finite. So, for instance, with God, there's this impulse to give, to create. Then there's an impulse, no, don't, because if you don't put a filter on it, you won't be able to create, because if God just projects his infinity, then he'll just have more of himself. He has to mask himself. He has to withhold himself in order to create the possibility for finite beings to have an experience of finitude and not be overwhelmed out of existence. So we're describing a process. So he says, you have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which is like, let's say, the first plane, and they are on a plane, the arms and the torso are on a plane. Then he says, afterwards, Bevoya Ashpa Lidei Maaseh, as this energy is coming closer to actual application, Dahainu b'shas hashpa mamish, that means when it's actually being delivered, when it's going from conceptual to practical, there's an internal consultation about how to do it. Chesed and Gvura is whether to do it. This next line is, okay, we've decided whether to do it. We've even decided how much to do. How should we do it? The fine-tuning. B'derech sheyuchol hamakabel lekabel hashpa, in a manner in which the recipient will be capable of receiving. Kagoin, shereitzel hashpia dvar chochma lelamdei livnai. For instance, he wants to teach wisdom to his son. Im yemrenu loy kula kameishi besichlai. If he, the father, will tell it all to his son, as the father understands it in his mind, lo yuchol habein lo havanu lekabel. The son will not be able to receive it. So if you have a professor come in and give a lecture the way that he would speak to his colleagues, it's a waste of time. Nobody's going to understand a word of it. Rather, he has to organize it in a new system, in a new context. Dover, dover, al oifnov. Every word spoken in the proper manner. Ma'at, ma'at, tzabislach. A little bit at a time. He has to dole it out, mete it out carefully. Ubechinas eitz azu nikras netzach v'hoid. This internal consultation or fine-tuning is netzach v'hoid. Now, I think before I translated it as perseverance and poise, if I remember correctly. And there are a lot of different, look, literally, netzach means eternality. Hoid means splendor. So the literal translations are not necessarily so helpful. Shehein klois yoitzais, these are the kidneys that advise. The kidneys that advise. Again, anatomical metaphors over here. The kidneys are sort of the last filter. This is sort of like the last filter before delivering. Vegam trein beyin. They are also the two male reproductive organs. Hamavashlim hazera, which prepare the seed, the reproductive seed. Shihi atipa hanimshachas mahamoyach, which is the drop that originates in the brain. Dahainu dvar chochma v'seichel animshach meseichel ha'av shlo yumshach kamei shehu seichel dakma oid b'meichei v'sichlei. In other words, taking this refined wisdom that's in the father's brain and delivering it to the child in a way that he'll be able to handle it. Rak yishtanik tzas midako sichlei v'yishave seichel she'ena dak kol kach. It has to be brought down a level. It has to be coarsened. It can't remain in its abstract version as it is in its source. So that the child will be able to receive it in his mind. And this is literally like reproduction. That's why we use that metaphor. He says the energy. This is a little bit of Kabbalistic understanding of genes, but he says that basically the essential energy that the father contributes, the mother as well, but they both contribute obviously genetics. But the seed, the energy, which is the essence of the child, that the child is built from, originates in the brain. Now it doesn't mean that it's a piece of the brain. It says that Alter Rebbe actually speaks about this elsewhere, not in Tanya, but in Torah. He says, obviously, it's not a piece of the brain. That's the whole point, that in the brain it exists energetically. And it has to be drawn down and become physicalized or materialized and turned into substance. And then it's turned into the genetic material, to the seed that is used for conception. And there are also these two properties called the millstones that grind the manna for the righteous. Again, why are they millstones? Processing. It's breaking it down. It's making it more deliverable and more consumable on the user end. So what did he just describe here? He said, we have one level, chesed and gvura, and tiferes. But that's not enough to be ready to deliver it. If you're talking about Hashem's relationship with the finite creation, so it's not ready yet to practically create a world. If you're talking about the way it exists within us, then meaning it's not ready yet to be delivered to a person. I'm not ready to go deal with the other person yet that I'm relating to. So there's another line that needs to get in to contribute its function over here, and that's what we call netzach and hoid. So he compares it to the kidneys, he compares it to the reproductive organs, he compares it to millstones, but he says very clearly what it does is it's another layer of processing. Like the triple filtered vodka. Which company has that on the bottle? The triple filter, whatever. Okay, I don't know. Like millstones, where you take the kernels and you break them down into little specks of flour. Kach tzarech ha'av lahaktin haseichel, so too, in the metaphor of the father teaching the child, the father has to break down his wisdom. Udvar chochma, shereitz alashpil livnoi, that he wants to teach to his son. Ulachalkom lechalokim rabim, and break it down into little pieces. V'loimer loy ma'at ma'at b'moitzis v'das, and he has to say it to him a little bit, gradually at a time, with different devices and discernment. V'gam b'chlal b'chinas netzach hu l'natzeach v'lamid neged kol meinei ha'ashpa v'alimud mibnei mebayis mechutz. Also netzach is, he says, l'natzeach. That means to be victorious, to triumph. That's another meaning of the word netzach. To triumph over any opposition, internally or externally. Remember earlier I translated it as perseverance. Netzach is a push to break through anything that would hold back this process from moving forward. So that's why to be menatzeach means to be victorious. It means to overcome. If you think about also spatially or anatomically, we've been speaking about lines, chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, and hod. But also you can speak about axes, meaning vertical lines. So just like chesed is on the right side, on this plane, like when you look at your ticket for your seat, there's the aisle and there's the row, the x-axis and the y-axis, okay? So you have here this plane. The right side of the higher plane is chesed. On the lower plane, the right side is netzach. You understand why netzach would be a lower level expression of a similar concept as chesed? You understand why they're both on the right side? They're both pushing things through. Now, what's the difference then? Why then they're synonymous? No, because chesed is more conceptual. Chesed is more like, I'm in the mood to give. I want to give. Give what? I didn't work that out yet. Netzach is the fine-tuning that when we get there, we're in the thick of it, and we need to negotiate through whatever the obstacles are. So netzach is the one that's actually, okay, give this, give here, give how. But it's the same thrust as chesed, but it's more, it's closer to delivery. Now, he doesn't explain here so clearly the function of hod, so I need to unpack it a little bit more. Hod, I said before, means splendor. But that's not helpful. Hod is related to another word, hoida'ah, which is gratitude. Like toda rabah, right? Toda, thank you. Gratitude. What's the concept here of gratitude? Remember how I translated it before when I was reading the Pasach Eliyahu source? I said netzach and hod, perseverance and poise. So I translate hod as poise. Poise, I think, is like someone who has poise. They don't burst into the room. They don't make loud noises. They have certain, refinement. They know how to control themselves. You understand why that would be on the same axis as gvura? Right? That makes sense? So just like netzach is a lower level of chesed, they're both on the right axis. So hod is a lower level of gvura. They're both on the left axis. So hodah, gratitude. Gratitude is also related to the concept of admission. Admission. Like in a legal proceeding where one litigant concedes to the other, you would say he is moideh. It's the same word. He admits that the other person's claim is true. Now, why are gratitude and admission related? Why are they from the same word? Because, it's interesting. Most people, when they're grateful for something, then they let it into their reality. They admit that it's true. And if they are not grateful for it, they don't like it, then they have this neurotic sort of reality rejection where they like to ignore it or be in denial of it or at least be resentful of it. It shouldn't be true. I know it's true, but it shouldn't be true, right? When we talk about haidah, it's actually the reverse. It's not that you admit something is true because you're thankful for it, but you're thankful for it because you admit that it's true. That if it's real, then it's got to be what it's supposed to be. God knows what he's doing. So the poise, the ability to step back and sort of not have your judgment and to receive. Hoid is an ability to receive. That is related to gratitude and it's related to acceptance. Obviously, a person who has acceptance is going to live in gratitude. Now, when we talk about Hashem's Hoid, again, we're talking about Hashem, quote unquote, taking a step back. Obviously, he's not literally taking a step back. Where would he step to? Where would he go? Where would he go that he's not there? But meaning, again, masking himself, allowing us an experience of autonomy, not objectively, ontologically autonomous, because God forbid there's nothing separate from God, but to have the experience of autonomy, which, by the way, is not free will, but it's not the time to discuss that right now. Free will is actually quite the opposite, but it's not time to discuss that. So you have Netzach and Hoid, the perseverance and the poise, which are sort of making last-minute adjustments, how much to either push or pull back. Okay. But we have to continue here. Ubechinis Yesoid. Then we have Yesoid. Yesoid literally means foundation. Like a building is built on a foundation. He al derech mashal his kashrus shemekasher of sichlei b'seichel b'nai. If you want to use the metaphor again of the Father teaching the Son, it's the relationship of the Father and the Son. Yesoid is the relationship of the Father and the Son. The hiskashrus, the kesher, literally means a knot. It means that they're tied together. When they learn together in an environment of love where he lovingly desires that his son should understand. And without this feeling of connectedness, gam im hoya haben shoymea diburim elu atzmam mipi aviv. Even if the son would hear the very same words being spoken by the father, shemedaber ba'dei v'loimed la'atzmei, where the father's speaking to himself. Let's say the father's a public speaker, and he's practicing his lecture for tonight and pacing around in his office at home and saying his lecture. And the son is sitting outside on the other side of the door, overhearing every word. Lo hoya mevin kol kach kemei achshav. The son will not understand it to the same degree. Sha'aviv mekashe sichle elav medaber imay panim el panim ba'ava v'cheshik v'shecheshik ma'id sheyavin b'nai. The same way, he will not understand the same way as if the father is lovingly speaking face to face to the child. Yesoid is a very intangible but extremely decisive factor in this process. I say intangible because technically, what difference does it make? We already have the Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, and Hoid. The father already basically decided, here's the lesson plan, here's what I'm going to deliver, here's how I'm going to say it. The Yesoid just means how he feels about his son when he's doing it. Well, what does that have to do with anything? And yet, the Baal HaTanya says, it makes all the difference. That when there's that loving connection, the son understands better. I tell this to parents all the time. It's not what you're saying. They say, well, what can I say to my child that they'll listen to me? Are there different words I could memorize? Give me a script. They don't literally say, give me a script, but, in so many words, that's what they ask for a lot. and I always tell them, it really doesn't matter what words you use. If there's a connection, and you can't fake a connection. If there's a connection, an emotional connection, what we call yesod, which he calls hiskashrus, a being bound up together, then the words will work. But if there's not a connection, then it doesn't. So yesod is the relationship between the giver and the recipient. You see when you speak to crowds that in the end, and it really is literally the end, because yesod is like the last link, or it's the penultimate, because we have to get to Malchus, but it's the last thing before the delivery. Remember, by the way, in the Pasuk Eliyahu, anatomically, what he said that yesod was? He said yesod was ois bris kodesh. Siyuma de gufa ois bris kodesh. Siyuma de gufa means the end of the body. It means the terminal point. If you think about, many times the Kabbalists will use reproduction as the ultimate metaphor for creator and creation, or for the creative act. So like that terminal point, which is the actual bridge between one party and the other. So that's why it's likened to the place of the circumcision. So obviously people who are not mature, they hear this and, you can't handle the fact that it's speaking about these types of these things, and you can get very distracted. But if you understand the metaphor properly, really what it's saying is this is like the final delivery. So this is the bridge that connects the giver to the recipient. In emotional terms, he says it's the relationship between the giver and the recipient. What I'm saying is it's not inherently sexual. Sexuality, human sexuality, is a lower level manifestation or metaphor of this concept. In its archetype, it is the essential concept of connection. It just, on the physical plane, this is how it's manifested. At any rate, the point is, you see when you're speaking to a group, you have to prepare what you're going to say. You have to know what you're saying. You have to care about the subject. Then you have to think about your audience, and you have to think, well, how should I say it to them? Which jokes, which references should I use? How much should I give them? What will be cognitive overload? What will be too much? What will be too little? That'll be too boring. And you do all that stuff. That's the Chesed Gvurat Tferes Netzach and Haid. But at the end, you walk into the room, and you feel the connection with the crowd. And I do a lot of speaking, so to me, this is a very common experience in my life. So I don't know how often all of you are on this side of the podium, but after all the preparation, all the decisions about how you should say it and how much, and at the end, it really comes down to the emotional connection. That if I'm feeling like I care, if I feel, I can't be eloquent for an audience that I don't care about. So if I feel that I care about this, that I want you to get this, and not that I want you to get it because I want you to tell me I said it well, then it's about me. But I want it for you. I think that this is going to help you, and therefore I'm going to only say it in ways that are helpful to you. I'm not going to say more than is helpful. I'll try not to say less than is helpful. So that's the yesod part. Okay. What I didn't speak about is I mentioned that there are 10 Sefiros, right? So there's 10. And 10 koiches and nefesh, 10 soul powers. So we're missing 3. Oh, I didn't do Malchus, did I? Skipped Malchus. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So Malchus is the 7th of the 7. And that is called, literally, Malchus is kingship. Kingship means an administrator. That's what a king is. A king is an administrator. Malchus is executive functioning. It's the final delivery. So if you remember in the Pasuk Elio, he called it the mouth. Malchus peh. It's the mouth. That's the final delivery, how I actually, and the mouth is a metaphor because sometimes we speak without our mouth. You can speak in many ways. There are different languages. There are different modes of communication. But the point is communication is always for an other. So Malchus is for an other. When we speak about Hashem's Malchus, we mean Hashem as he is there for an other. What's the other? Creation. So Hashem as he becomes a creator and has a relationship with creation is the attribute of Malchus, Hashem's self-expression. And the same within us, that when we express ourselves, that's called Malchus. The way I interface with that which is outside of myself is called Malchus. Okay. So we have the 7. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. Did I do it? Chesed. You know what? I'll do it the way you're facing. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And usually it's drawn Malchus down here, just to illustrate that it's even more close to the culmination of the process. So we have 7. And that corresponds to the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, the Exodus and the Revelation at Sinai. But I didn't speak about, there are 3 more. Okay, very good. So where are these other 3? The other 3, as opposed to these 7, generally at the very beginning, I call them attributes. I translated the word midos as attributes. You can also translate them as emotions. They're all emotions in the sense that an emotion is an energy that compels me to relate to that which is outside of myself. But then there's a higher plane of Chochmah, Bina, Das, which are the intellectual traits. So I just want to speak quickly about what they are and their relationship with the 7. Chochmah and Bina are called father and mother, respectively. Midos are the children. The emotions are the children. And the concept is that the way that you cognitively process information is the way that you're going to end up feeling about that subject matter. So emotions don't materialize out of thin air. They're not out of nowhere. You're processing information and you're coming to intellectual decisions about what it means. And based on your interpretation of the data, then you come to emotional conclusions. So the emotions are the children, the offspring of the intellect. He says something very interesting here. And I'm reading from Igeres HaKodesh Tezvav, from letter number 15 of Igeres HaKodesh. So he says, Umakar v'sherish midas elu, the source and the root of these attributes, the 7 attributes, who mechochma bina das shebenafshe, are from chochma, bina, and das. And I can translate that literally the way they do as wisdom, understanding, knowledge. I don't think it's helpful. I'll get into what they actually are in a moment. Ki lefi seichel ha'adam kach hein midosav. Because as a person's intellect, so are his emotions. As a person's intellect, so are his emotions. Kenira b'chosh, as we observe empirically. And I love this example. Shahakotan, that a child, she chochma bina das shalai, hein bebechinas katnos, his chochma bina das, his intellectual faculties are immature. Kach kol midaisav hein bidvarim ktanei oerech. Therefore, his emotions are about trivialities, right? He gets all gleeful about something as silly as a candy. And he gets heartbroken and gut-wrenching sobs, falling on the floor crying over something as trivial as also a candy. Right? The candy fell. Now he's crying. So he explains that emotions are the product of the intellect. Cognitive capacities determine emotional capacities. You cannot have an emotion for something you're not cognitively capable of appreciating. So as you mature and you become able to understand things more deeply, then the things you care about become things of greater consequence, things that really matter in the long run. But when you don't have that cognitive capacity, so then you just have strong emotions about candy and other little trivialities. Okay, but let's break it down. I mentioned Chochmah is called father, Bina is called mother. Chochmah is father and Bina is mother in the sense that these are two partners in procreation. And I mentioned that the emotions are the children. And Chochmah's contribution is like the contribution of a father to reproduction, where he gives a tiny, tiny little packet of genetic code. Little microscopic zip file of genetic code. And then from that is unpacked this complex being called the child. Chochmah is hyper-condensed. Chochmah is sometimes called Borek HaMavrik, the lightning flash, because it's the aspect of cognition which is often brought on through sudden inspiration. I suddenly had an idea. Boom, it hit me. I have an invention. That's Chochmah. Sometimes Chochmah is compared to seeing, because when you see something, you can see it all in a flash. You can look at a complex painting and you've seen the entire painting immediately. Now, you may not remember what you saw. You didn't process all the details, but you've seen all the details. As opposed to hearing, where if you hear 1 second of a symphony, you haven't heard it. You only heard 1 second of it. But seeing, you could see the whole painting in 1 second. So that's Chochmah, that initial flash. Bina is the mother in as much as it is akin to the womb of cognition, wherein Chochmah becomes expanded and elaborated upon and articulated into details. Which is why, by the way, Bina is often compared to hearing, just like Chochmah is compared to seeing, Bina is compared to hearing. Because with hearing, you can only hear one note at a time. I mean, you can play double speed nowadays, but there's a certain amount of time that it takes to listen to the whole song. Bina is breaking it down and processing it, taking it apart. Now, a little retention here. Remember when we spoke about the emotional plane, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes? So these axes extend all the way up to the intellectual plane. Chochmah, Bina, Das. Chochmah is on the right axis like Chesed. Bina is on the left axis like Gvura. Would it make sense to you if I were to say that Bina is related to Gvura? They're both on the left side, because just like Gvura is judgment on an emotional level, like should I give, should I not give? Bina is cognitive judgment. It takes the concept and breaks it up, makes distinctions, makes analysis. So that's the father and the mother that create the emotions. I was just telling my daughter Friday night on Shabbos, she went to look for something in the fridge. And I told her, I said, sometimes men go look for something in the fridge and they can't find it. and then their wives tell them, well, go look again, and they still can't find it. And then the wife takes the jar of mustard, whatever it was, and she says, it's right here. Why didn't I see it? So I was explaining to my daughter the difference between Chochmah and Bina, that a man, being a man, is not purely a manifestation of divine masculinity, but generally, that we all have different aspects. We're complex beings, but generally speaking, a man has more masculinity than femininity, and a woman has more femininity than masculinity. And on a cognitive level, that means that men have more chokhmah and women have more bina. What that means is, in general, we're speaking generalities here. Obviously, you'll find exceptions. But what that means, I told my daughter, I said, a man will sometimes he'll open the fridge and he'll look at what's there, and he just sees the big picture. He can't see the details. So he doesn't know that the jar of mustard's right there. The beauty of Chokhmah is that it's the initiator, it's the beginning of the process. It's the one that comes up with the concept, and you can't do anything without it, without its contribution. On the other hand, if it doesn't quickly deposit itself within Bina and get something going over there, it will dissipate. It'll disappear. It's not sustainable because it's so abstract. It's like that thing where, I just had the coolest idea. What was it? I can't remember. Well, if it's important, you'll remember it. No, that's actually not true. Sometimes it's important and you don't remember it. If you don't put it in Bina right away, you'll lose it. So what's putting it in Bina? Bina is articulation, breaking it down. Like, I saw this thing, a picture speaks 1,000 words, but if I don't start putting it into words, I'm going to lose it. So Bina is the breaking it down, the process of putting it into, or articulating it in details and in words and descriptions. Bina is expansive and elaborative. As far as a cognitive tool, metaphor is a primary example of Bina. When you compare one thing to another thing, a parable, an analogy, that's Bina thought, horizontal thought, where you use a different thing to get a new angle on something else. That's Bina. Okay. Now, I mentioned that there are 3 intellectual faculties. So what's the third one? God. Right, Das. But there's only 2 parents. There's a father and a mother. So what's this third dude here? Das is not a parent. It is the relationship between the parents. The first time we find that word biblically is where it says, Va'adam, that Adam, the first person, Yada, knew Chava, Eve, his wife. What does it mean he knew her? Well, you read the rest of the sentence. He knew her and they begat a child. It means he was intimate with her. And they had offspring. Das is intimacy. What does that mean? Well, remember how, like, at the end of the emotions, we had that center axis of Yesod, and we said Yesod is his kashrus, his connection. If you go all the way up to the top plane, the intellectual, the center axis is Das. It's also connection. It's also connection. The only difference is Yesod is a connection between me and the other. Das is all connections going on internally, inside myself. It makes sense, by the way, that the central axis would be a connector, right? Because thing in the middle, right? That's the glue. And again, we're not speaking spatially over here. So when you say something's in the middle, we don't mean in the middle spatially. What we mean is functionally, it's in the middle. When you say one thing connects another thing, so that thing is quote unquote in the middle. So Das performs internal connection. What to what? When you connect one thing to another thing. So what's Das connecting? There are 2 levels of Das. There's Das Elyon and Das Tachton. higher das and lower das. Higher das, das is always a connection. Higher das is the connection between Chochmah and Bina, the father and the mother themselves, their intimate relationship. Lower das is the connection between Chochmah and Bina together and their children, the midos, the emotions. So the higher das connects the father to the mother so that they can have children. The lower das is the connection between the parents and the children. It's very abstract. What does that mean? Very simple. In terms of the human experience, das is called concentration or focus. If you don't continue to focus, so then Chochmah is not marrying Bina, and your great idea will just disappear. And if you don't continue to focus, then the marriage of Chochmah and Bina can remain academic or theoretical, and it won't turn into an emotion. So it's the focus, both on both planes, that sees to it that the process gets to the next phase. Chochmah and Bina will not unite with each other and have children if there's not continued focus. They just go their separate ways. And Chochmah and Bina together will not end up sustaining the children if there's not a connection between them and the emotions. In other words, you might say, well, I used to be passionate about that subject. I'm not. Well, what was happening when you were passionate about it? Probably you were thinking about it a lot. Then I stopped thinking. I got bored. I had burnout. I couldn't deal with it anymore. Got distracted with other stuff. All right, would you like to feel strongly about it again? I mean, it depends what it is. Maybe it's like you don't want to feel strongly about it again. But would you like to feel strongly again? Yeah, okay, how do I do that? Well, just start focusing on it again. Start thinking, perseverating on a cognitive level. I promise you, it will lead to an emotional outcome. It's inevitable. That's just what happens. When Chochmah and Bina get together and stay together, then they have children. So das is that connector that makes sure that everything continues, that there's continuity. Okay. Let's just maybe wrap this up like this. We understand this idea that these are patterns that repeat themselves on every level. So a lot of times people ask, why do we learn this information? Like, it's so abstruse. How will this make me a better person? So let's look at it like this. If you understand better how these archetypes operate on the spiritual plane, you will gain new insights into how you are wired. And if you gain a new insight into how you are wired, obviously that kind of self-awareness lends itself to being a better person, making better choices. So you can study these spiritual concepts, and it can actually lead to personal growth, self-refinement. Conversely, you can work it the other way around, like I said. And that when we learn these things as the metaphors of human experience, we can glimpse a little bit of appreciation for the way God relates to his creation. And if you can appreciate even a little bit how God relates to his creation, that will increase your love and awe of God, which, first of all, are mitzvahs. It's a commandment to love God and to be in awe of God. But secondly, this also causes you to become a more refined person. The more you love and awe God, then the more refined your pursuits and your goals and your values will be. The more you will be able to commit yourself to what really matters. The more you will be able to pursue things that actually have eternal value rather than just doing what feels good in the moment. So even though these concepts, these spiritual concepts, are very, very lofty, the more you learn them, whether you do the hafshata or the halbasha, you strip it away and go from below to above, or you take from the archetype and you bring it down to the terrestrial manifestation. Either way you do it, and both ways that you do it, will make you more of a mensch, will make you more refined. And who doesn't want to become more refined? That's what we're here for. We're given a lifetime to work on a project, and we are the project. And these keys, these 10 Sefiros, are the language that we use for working on that project.